Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before starting the video, please subscribe and keep watching for more detailed videos. When Rob Warren and Sophie Sierra walked away from 90 Day, the last resort, viewers were left with 100 questions. Tension, miscommunication, and frustration had followed them throughout the season. And just when it seemed like everything was heading for a split, news surfaced that they had been intimate after leaving the resort. That changed everything. So where do they stand now? That's what we're diving into today. Not with recycled updates or surface-level insights, but with a real look at what this development means for their relationship, what signs were missed, and what their recent choices say about their future. You're going to see this story in a completely different light. When Rob and Sophie arrived on the show, their energy was rocky. Sophie had reservations, and Rob struggled with communication. It wasn't just about the drama. It was about two people who clearly had deep feelings for each other, but couldn't seem to sync emotionally. Throughout their time at the resort, you could see both of them wrestling with vulnerability. There were moments when Sophie tried to express her needs, and Rob, often guarded, gave just enough, but never quite enough to close the gap. Their therapy sessions opened up wounds and long-standing trust issues. Sophie had brought up past concerns about Rob's online behavior, about feeling dismissed, about not feeling safe emotionally. Rob, for his part, didn't always validate those feelings. He would get defensive. He would shut down. And that pattern kept showing up. Even the other couples noticed. But here's what's interesting. Despite all that tension, there was an undeniable pull between them. So when they left the resort and admitted later that they had been intimate, fans were shocked but not entirely surprised. It wasn't just a physical reconnection. It was a sign that the emotional bond was still there. And for a couple that had struggled so much to communicate during the season, that moment signaled something important. It wasn't closure, it was a spark of possibility. Now, intimacy after conflict can mean many things. For some, it's a way to express unresolved feelings. For others, it's a comfort zone, something familiar. In Rob and Sophie's case, it felt like both. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of a script. It was real, and it opened the door to a very different kind of conversation between them. One that wasn't about who was wrong or who needed to apologize more. It became about what they still wanted from each other. Sources close to the show have hinted that their post-resort time included more than just a single encounter. They reportedly spent a few days together, away from cameras, away from pressure. And during that time, something shifted. Rob began listening more, and Sophie began opening up without immediately preparing for a fight. That space allowed them to look at each other not as reality TV co-stars or adversaries in therapy, but as two people who might still want the same future, just not the one they had tried to force before. So where does that leave them now? According to recent updates, Rob and Sophie have been cautiously rebuilding. They haven't rushed into posting joint videos or doing a social media love fest. In fact, their online presence has remained pretty neutral. That's deliberate. They're not trying to sell a happy ending. They're trying to live one quietly. And honestly, that's the healthiest move they could make. Sophie has reportedly set new boundaries. She's made it clear that communication needs to change, that emotional validation isn't optional. And Rob, while still stubborn at times, has shown a willingness to adjust. Friends say he's been asking more questions, listening without interrupting, and finally taking responsibility for how his words and silences impact Sophie. But let's be real, it's not a fairy tale yet. They've had some setbacks. There have been moments where old patterns creep back in. Sophie sometimes feels unheard again. Rob sometimes reverts to sarcasm or emotional distance. But the key difference is they're catching themselves faster. They're choosing to pause and talk instead of letting the silence grow. This intimacy after leaving the resort wasn't just about physical attraction. It was a checkpoint, a moment that forced them to ask, is this really over? Do we want to walk away, or do we want to fight for this differently? And that's where they are. Two people learning how to show up for each other in new ways. They've also been in therapy privately. Not because the show told them to, but because they chose to. That matters. Choosing to get help without a camera rolling means they're finally doing the work for themselves,
It's a small
not
sign
with
with
big
big
implications. When you look at how they interact now, even in subtle ways, there's a softness that wasn't there before. Rob doesn't talk over Sophie as much. Sophie doesn't raise her defenses so quickly. These aren't huge changes, but they're real. They've also been reconnecting on things outside the relationship. Friends say they've started doing normal couple things again. Cooking dinner, watching shows together, going on walks. And it's in those quiet, ordinary moments that they're finding their rhythm again. No drama, no audience, just trying to figure out what it means to trust each other again. There's also been talk of moving in together again, but this time they're not rushing it. Sophie has made it clear that cohabitation can't come at the cost of her emotional well-being. She's even said she's okay with taking another year to decide if that step is right. That's a big shift from the urgency we saw earlier in their relationship. Rob, surprisingly, agrees. He's been more patient than anyone expected. He said he understands now why Sophie pulled away emotionally. He admitted he didn't create a safe space for her to be vulnerable. That kind of self-awareness is new for him, and it might be the thing that keeps this relationship going. They're not promising forever. They're not saying everything's perfect, but they're in a place of rebuilding, a place where both of them are finally working on being better partners, not just better performers in a relationship narrative. And while the fans are still watching, still speculating, Rob and Sophie are choosing to stay quieter, more private, and more intentional. That's maturity. That's growth. What they've shown us is that relationships are rarely black and white. They're not just about dramatic fights or steamy reunions. They're about the messy, unfiltered parts in between. The part where you get vulnerable, where you admit your mistakes, where you fight not with each other but for each other. Intimacy after a breakup can be complicated. It can be a step back or a step forward. For Rob and Sophie, it was the moment that stopped the spiral. It didn't fix everything, but it reminded them of what they still had. And that reminder was strong enough to pull them back into the conversation. This time, with more honesty and less ego. So as of now, Rob and Sophie aren't just trying again. They're trying differently. No big declarations, no dramatic twists. Just quiet effort. And sometimes, that's the most powerful kind. Only time will tell where this path leads. But for now, they're walking it together. And for two people who've been through so much, that's already a win. Come back to our channel for all your updates. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel.